Hello and welcome to Cut and Splice. This is Gil,
This is Jason.
And Matt,
and today we're talking about The Godfathers, Godfather Part One and Part Two. Right before we started recording, we were kind of saying how the Godfather Part Two is about as long as the Avatar sequel. In any case, so yeah, this would be a double episode, which hopefully we'll try to keep it under control, lengthwise, and. And yeah, we'll first review them quickly, and then we'll get into spoilers with analysis after that. The reason why I thought about these two movies, for one thing, I've never shown them to my wife Diana, so I thought it was a good excuse to force us to see this, and finally, and revisit it, and also, and this could be a jumping off point for the conversation, but I've noticed over the years that a lot of people tended to think that the second Godfather was better than the first one, and I never had that impression. I didn't even have a very strong liking to the second Godfather, so I felt like, if nothing else, that's a reason to revisit it. I see it also. It won more Oscars than the first one, but then the reviews are actually stronger for the first one, and the user ratings are slightly stronger. So it seems like maybe it's just a certain group of people. But I don't know. What do you guys think? How was it for you to revisit
Well,
the movies?
did your opinion change at all when you watched it this time, or did it pretty much just solidify what you already just said?
It solidified it. I mean, I will say Diana found the part two more interesting, but I think maybe that had to do with the fact that it was different. The intercutting of the two stories, the telling of the origins of the father and the son, and then of course the some of the storylines of where it goes to, like the Cuba thing, and it's got a bit more of an international intrigue to it. So maybe like the just the plot points, maybe I can see might be more appealing to some people. And I don't know, maybe some people are big fans of the De Niro performance. I think it doesn't even
I'm
come
sure that's got to be
remotely.
part of it.
Yeah, and I know he won an Oscar for it, but honestly, I think Pacino's performance in both movies is stronger, and Marlon Brando is way like spectacular. All I can say for De Niro is that he held his own. He didn't crash and burn. A lot of actors would crash and burn, but I don't think his performance was an all-time great.
Hmm.
I don't know. That's
I,
just my
I
impression.
I'm glad you brought it up because it's one of the things I wanted to talk about too. Is that I definitely think that The Godfather 2 is often talked about as like one of the best sequels of all time. And I've definitely met a good number of people myself that fit the description you're talking about, where they prefer it to the first one. I think it's a great movie. I just think that it's a great sequel too. I just think that the first one is a little better. But I don't know. It's definitely an interesting thing to talk about.
so actually, the funny thing is, I just watched both films back to back today for the first time. I've watched both films independently, but this is the first time that I've like just sat down for 7 hours and just devoted all that time to watching the two movies back to back. Um, I, uh, I mean, really, I mean, okay. The reality is that both of these movies, if you're rating them on a 10-star scale, they're both nines at least.
Mhm.
At least for me. The Godfather is a much more focused film in a lot of ways than The Godfather 2. The Godfather 2 had to lose its focus in order to tell the two stories and go back and forth and give the origins of Vito and intercut that with the rise of Michael and everything that's going on in Michael's life all those years later. Um, if there's a weakness to The Godfather 2, is that I would have liked. I think that what would have made The Godfather 2 a more perfect movie than Godfather 1 would have been if there were some way, because like The Godfather 1 is all about Michael's journey away from grace in so many ways.
Yeah.
And The Godfather 2 is Michael continuing his fall from grace while elevating his status. But Vito's story is actually kind of like Michael's in Godfather 1, where, it's a loss of innocence and how he found himself becoming the head of a crime syndicate, and how this innocent person who you meet as a child eventually becomes somebody who's capable of unspeakable crimes. And instead of mirroring each other in Godfather 2, it just seemed like I don't even know if they're complementing each other in Godfather 2.
I one thing I could not stop thinking about when I watched these, especially the second one, um, which I saw today. Uh, I kind of almost wish that I thought about suggesting this or something, but I don't. I have no idea if any of us would have been able to do it. But so I've seen The Godfather a bunch of times. I think the first time I ever saw these two movies was on like VHS tape, probably back in like, I don't know, like 2000 to 2002, sometime around then. Like definitely at least 20 years ago. And I remember watching them, probably not back to back, but within a weekend or something like that. And then since then, I had only seen The Godfather maybe one or two other times, years apart from each other. Um, so I definitely remembered The Godfather 2, but it wasn't nearly as like cemented in my brain as the first one was. And it was probably 6 years ago or something, five or 6 years ago, that a friend of mine told me about that the Godfather saga. I don't know if you guys ever watched that or not, but it's basically them, some people who they took these two movies and then edited them together into a TV miniseries in chronological order. So they
Huh.
take all the De Niro stuff from Godfather 2 and tell that story chronologically, and then stitch it into the all the stuff in The Godfather, and then tack on the others. It basically just tells the entire story of the two movies in chronological order. And what Matt just said stuck out to me because I was sitting there watching this and I was like, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining. Like I love The Godfather 2, but I was watching it and it's like you're watching the De Niro stuff and you're like, man, this is good. And then the scene changes and I'm like, oh man, I wanted to keep going. I wanted to see what was going on there. And then it's like, it's not like it's bad. The other story's really good too. All the stuff with Michael is really good. But then it switches back and we're like, oh, we're going back to the flashback again. Because rather than like super complimenting each other, it's almost like two excellent stories that don't really need to be interstitched together. I mean, it's not like it really hurts that much or anything, but I just couldn't help but shake that. Like, I kept thinking about it over and over. I was like, man, I almost kind of wish I could watch that other version now. I want to see how that affects the story.
Yeah, no, I feel like it's definitely suffers from the two movies syndrome. Aesthetically, it's different, and even acting wise, it's just very, very different. And and there's definitely, obviously, and we can get into it as far as like possible interpretations of what was going in there, like as far as themes that were concerned. It definitely feels like it was very intentional, but it doesn't work well. And more than anything, yeah, it's a pacing issue. It's a major pacing issue. The movie doesn't flow as well as the first one because there's not forward momentum in the same way. It almost feels like the second movie is a miniseries. Like at least could have been cut like three, 1 hour long TV episodes, as opposed to the first movie that feels very much like a beginning, middle of and an end structure, and it's got
Yeah.
these like ups and downs. Like some of the scenes there, like the the some monumental scenes there, which there's not as many of them in the second one.
Yeah.
Is the scene at the Italian restaurant,
Mhm.
and then the obviously towards the end the baptism thing. Like there's all these famous scenes. What happens to James Caan character,
The
Yeah.
the
turn the
the Italian woman that he almost marries.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah
my
yeah
my
exactly, the whole thing in Sicily, which by the way, that's the one
yeah,
area that drags to me the movie down a bit, is
mm,
when he goes to Sicily. It's a bit like I totally get that it needs to happen, but it just like could have been cut slightly shorter. But yeah, it kind of reminded me of the flashbacks in The Godfathers. Like okay, this is a whole other movie.
Oh, we're back to the old country.
yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
uh,
Which is again
uh,
fine because it was more minimized there than it was in the.
Yes.
yeah. Without spoiling the ending yet, now when it comes to the ending of both movies, again, without getting into details, the first Godfather knocked it the fuck out of the park. Uh, Godfather 2, it was strong, but not nearly as strong. I mean, also, Godfather 1 has a distinction of having instilled my persistent lifelong phobia of revolving doors.
Yeah. Um,
So,
I guess I should touch on my ratings and Jason too, so we can just move on to the spoilers unless we have anything else. I definitely like would recommend for people to watch these movies. I don't know if I would recommend the second one. I would recommend the first one. I
For
think
shame.
it's a monumental movie in filmmaking, even though it's about the mob and stuff and the violence and stuff that might not interest you. The filmmaking, and we can get into that in the second part, like so some of the technique, the storytelling technique, the movement of the camera, the use of lighting, the use of music, creation of tension, all that stuff is it's a lot of movies have come close and maybe matched it in certain ways, but very few movies got it all right all at the same time. Like this movie, it's just really masterful. It's amazing to me how Coppola had so much trouble duplicating this, but I guess that's what the issue that um, uh, Orson Welles had with Citizen Kane. But yeah, it's just a stroke of genius. I would definitely give a 9 to the first one. I would even say like maybe 9.5. If it was it's not my kind of movie. I don't like you know crime boss kind of movie, mob movies. But yeah, like otherwise I would give it a 10. The second one, I really feel like it's more like an 8.5 for me. Like I don't want to say 8. I would lean towards like 8.5, but I don't think it cracks the 9 for me personally.
Hmm. I think they're both great. I mean, I guess in terms of numbers, I don't think I'm very far off from you. I think they're about one, one number away from each other. I guess you could say, 1 point, however you want to call that. I'd put The Godfather at like almost a 10. Like it's like a very strong 9, and then like the sequel maybe a weaker 9 towards an 8. Towards a very strong 8, I guess, if that makes sense.
no, that makes sense to me at least. Uh,
Is
yeah, I mean, the only reason I wouldn't give The Godfather a perfect 10 is I still think that Come and See is the greatest movie ever made, and it's just not quite there.
Weird, but okay.
like a 9.9 or something. But yeah, it's basically there, and yeah, The Godfather 2, yeah, not that far behind, as I already alluded to end a sentence with a preposition.
So
Yeah.
we all agree that
I
Godfather
think
Part 2
everybody
is
should see
less.
these movies.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I guess if you like the first one, then it's worthwhile seeing the second one because it's interesting to see De Niro tackle that character, and I do feel like they do it justice. They definitely show the gravitas of what kind of person he was and how he became who he was, which was nothing like what Michael turned out to be in some ways. But yeah, it's definitely interesting story and interesting storytelling, and for sure. So I guess spoilers.
Sure. I thought we already kind of doing it, but yeah,
Sort of, yeah. I don't know. It's a tough one, and I don't know, like
everybody's
if
seen this movie. It's fine.
yeah, a lot of people have seen these movies, but apparently, like some didn't. I remember, like in film school, there was one girl there that famously didn't see it, and like, drop everything right now and go see this movie. Or like all the film students being all like pretentious and stuff.
Yeah.
How are you in film school and you've not seen The Godfather?
It's harsh.
Yeah.
Um, talking about film school, it's funny that The Godfather was one of the movies where I can remember having like a moment the first time I ever watched it. Um, I mean, I wouldn't say as a kid, but I was like a teenager. I was like probably 15 or 16 or something like that. And I mean, I just watched a lot of movies, but I didn't know anything about movies or about how to make a movie or anything like that, obviously. But it was interesting. It's kind of a moment of like a moment that I remembered a strange validation, because when I was watching The Godfather, I remembered the first time I ever actually like sat down and watched all of it. I'm sure I'd seen little clips of it here and there, but never watched it because most of the time, if I was at home, I probably would have been considered too young to see it when I was like, a younger teen or something. But anyway, the first time I sat down and watched the whole thing, I just remember the scene where after Vito's been shot, the Godfather's been shot, but he survives miraculously, and all the little chess pieces are moving into place so that they can kill him in the little hospital that he's in.
Mhm.
Michael shows up, and then he wasn't supposed to be there, but he shows up and realizes that something's wrong, and he starts taking all these steps to try and protect his father. And then somebody shows up that he thinks is going to kill him, but it's the guy we saw earlier in the movie at the wedding. It's like
Yeah.
he's
baker.
not a mobster. He's like, yeah, he's a baker or something. He's just a guy who came to, just like Michael, to see the Godfather in this bad time, and he's a complete civilian. He's not anything big. And I just remember the scene where he's standing outside with him, and he tells me, he says, I'll do anything to help out. And he says, okay. And he flips his collar up, and he tells him to look big and put your hands in your pocket. And he gives him all these instructions to make him look like a little mobster, and everything, so that when they drive by, the hitmen just kind of like think twice and go away. And I remember like the details of that scene. And as a kid, I was like looking at it going like, man, like they really thought about this. Like this guy's grown up around these sort of people. He's not one of these people, but he's grown up around them. And he gives this guy all these instructions, and then they drive by. And I didn't really have a whole lot of like coherent thoughts about it, but I just remember going like, man, that was good. That was like really good. That was like really important and stuff. And I just remember thinking about that scene and liking it a lot. And then it's funny that, probably 10 years later or something, I remember in school, we're like, we're watching these, or we're talking about The Godfather, and I have no idea what class this would have been in. I don't remember what it was about or anything. I just remember somebody analyzing the movie and describing that, like, that's the scene where, like, a big turning point for Michael's character, because before that he's being very passive about everything, and then that's the moment that he, like, takes action and actually does something for the family, kind of thing. And then it's all, all the dominoes start falling after that. And I just remember when somebody said that, I was like, yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Or when you were younger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna one of the scenes that I should have mentioned earlier. Yeah, that one's also a very strong scene, and that relates to the storytelling, the filmmaking, like everything's in the shadows, the whole thing with the shaking device where they concentrate on the, like, he tries to light a cigarette and he can't, then he's
Oh
shaking,
yeah.
then he grabs his lighter
Yeah.
and he lights it and he's steady as a rock,
Hmm.
and he looks at his hand and he realizes, like, I guess it's in my genetics. Like, I'm just, like this, the fact that I'm not deterred by this
Hmm.
is, like, signifies something. And
Yeah,
I think this is,
he realizes that he's different from the other guy.
yeah, but obviously, I mean, he is a war hero and everything, went to the
Sure.
army and blah, blah, blah. But still, it's very different to be in the army than it is, to be in a situation where, like,
Hitmen are
assassins
gonna
might be
definitely come
coming.
kill you. Yeah.
Yeah, like, it's a you
Yeah.
fear for your life. I'm sure he feared for his life in the army too, but yeah, no, it's very different. And then the restaurant scene just
Mm.
takes that to a whole other level. Like, because he ends up not doing what they told him to do, like to come out blazing. Like, he sits down and he, like, keeps looking at them, and that scene, it's got to be like a top 10 movie scenes of all time. Like,
Mm.
Yeah.
the building of tension there, and the way that he's basically realizing that I'm gonna become a cop killer. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be like, that's it. There's no turning back after this
I mean,
scene.
the shifting in his eyes,
Yeah.
just the way that Pacino is shifting his eyes in that shot,
Yeah,
tells you everything. And the fact that Coppola and Gordon Willis. I mean, I'm going to be heaping a lot of praise on Gordon Willis, by the way. Um, just holding that shot while this guy is talking, and you just need to look at Michael's face, and you see this building in his brain. Like, okay, yeah, my life is about to change right now. I am about to kill two people. This, it, you see everything just in his eyes shifting and in that one shot, and it's just so well designed and beautifully built up to I mean, it's a payoff that we've been actually given some time to build up to, and it's just done perfectly.
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's the the first Godfather is a very, very, even though it's a 3-hour movie, it's extremely focused. It's a well calibrated movie. It's basically Breaking Bad in 3 hours, as opposed to 5, 6 seasons, which is why I'm not a big fan of Breaking Bad. I just don't feel like you need to have that long of an arc for someone to turn evil. Michael becomes evil within the span of 3 hours, and it's a magnificent. It's why it's one of the greatest movies ever made. It's one of the most magnificent character development and turns, even though it's tragic. But it's so subtle and yet so bombastically strong and impactful, and there's none of that in the second one. Like, there's no big revelation. He's just digging deeper and deeper into the hellish life that is to be a crime boss, but he's not really, like, I don't think he gets into any resolution there, really. It's just kind of depressing. Like, he learns a lot of lessons. but not. I don't know if it gets anywhere. I guess that's why maybe they eventually did The Godfather 3, because they felt like that it didn't really resolve anything as far
Yeah.
as his arc. Where the first one is a very big arc. He starts as this like, war hero, and he ends like with the door closing and stuff. That's
Yeah.
powerful. How do you go from here to there? That's what movies are all about. That's movie magic. Like, how do you start here and you end there and it actually makes sense? In some ways, like, there is no Breaking Bad without this movie. This is like
Sure.
what started the whole
Fair.
anti-hero, thing. And at some point a few episodes ago, I also mentioned that in a funny way, it is interesting that around the same time, um, Coppola's friend was making a very similar movie, only in space. Because the story of Star Wars is very similar to what's going on here, only that he doesn't turn. Is the idea that like your dad, that he doesn't know right away, but like your dad is a crime boss, and once you not that Vito actually doesn't want Michael to become so there's a
Yeah.
few like minor changes, but really it's all about like your fate, like
Yeah.
coming to terms with
Destiny.
your destiny, fate, the inevitability of the path that's been chosen for you, and whether you have a choice to change things. And Michael's thing is all about, from the get-go, he tells, what's her name, Kate,
Yeah.
he tells her that he's not his family, and if he gets into it, he's going to try to make it legit. And he makes all these moves that in the second Godfather, and that's where it gets interesting but boring at the same time. For me, it's necessary to see what happens in the Godfather 2, because that's him trying to go legit,
Yeah.
but you see that at every turn, it's just he
Yeah.
can't. And it is funny because I was waiting for this line for the longest time, this quotable line. And then I realized, I guess it was in Godfather 3, because that line of like, every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in.
No,
Uh,
yeah.
that's in Godfather 3, but I really feel like that should have been the log line of Godfather Part 2, is that is basically all his attempts as being a better person, a better father, a better everything, all that just fails completely. No matter how smart and sophisticated he is, he just sucks at it. He just can't find a way to like make this work. And that's his tragedy. And his father is not like that. If you look at like the flashbacks, his father is not a bad person. He is just an innocent person that is trying to understand what's going on with all these dons and these people that ask money from people just for protection and all this bullshit. And he ends up stumbling onto essentially having his own version of it, only his version is not mean spirited. He just commands respect, which is why people fear him. But in those flashbacks, the only person he kills is the other Don. Like, he doesn't really do a lot of bad things. He
Yeah.
just wants to replace worse people with a better version of that, which is him. But of course, later on, and we never see this, I'm assuming that, as things get corrupted, you have to do bad things. Like, you can't stay pure forever. But really, he's a good family man. He's a good father, and he's not a very, very bad criminal. Even in Godfather, in the first Godfather, like, Vito
Yeah.
actually has this code. Like,
He has principles.
he has principles. Like, he doesn't want to do the drugs. He doesn't want to, like, get the kids. Like, it's
Mhm.
interesting. And Michael, even though you would think should be one level up from him, ends up being one level less. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's
Mhm.
I this might be a bit of a sidetrack kind of thing here, but I really wanted to mention that I don't think it's right for us to talk about these movies without at least briefly mentioning the unfortunately not particularly great, but also simultaneously awesome parody movie, Mafia. That's like a direct parody of all of these films, particularly Godfather and Godfather 2 and Casino.
Like one of the 2 movies that I actually walked out of.
Yeah, no, it's a very poorly put together movie. It's got like a bunch of terrible garbage that doesn't work in it, but it has moments that when it's accurately parodying these movies, it's really funny. Like, I mean, you got Leslie Nielsen playing the Godfather, and they're just taking notes from these scenes, just like Gil just said, like he's got these principles and whatever, and of course they just take it and make it ridiculous. Like they're telling him, oh, we got to move in on this new thing. This is the future, Godfather. They're like, it's all about the drugs. And you got Leslie Nielsen, I'm sorry, did I say Leslie Nielsen? I'm sorry.
It's Lloyd Bridges.
Yeah, Lloyd Bridges. And he's like playing a complete idiot version of the Godfather, and he's like, drugs. I just don't like the idea of it. He's like, what good is it for? It doesn't taste good. You can't put it on crackers. I mean, let's not get into that. No. and then probably the greatest thing in that movie, which this is how you know when a parody is really good. Like when you think of like a Weird Al song and how it's like better, and you can't even help but think about the parody when you listen to the original song, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Same sort of thing with it. I love The Godfather. It's a great movie, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this scene. But if you've seen the movie Mafia and then you go back and watch The Godfather, you cannot help but think like there is something very odd in the way they filmed the last scene that he's in when he dies with the heart attack or whatever in the tomato fields, their little tomato crop or whatever they have in their little backyard.
The garden.
Garden. Thank you. The garden. Yeah. Because they just almost film it like shot for shot. It's like they don't change anything except make it bigger and stupider. And in the parody, it's I believe it's the James Caan character, the older brother's son or something, right? It's his grandson that he's playing with, but it's like an evil little kid. He's like a mean little kid. And so rather than taking this, this heartfelt moment where the Godfather has been shot and he's recovering and he gets this one last moment with his grandson before he has a stroke and dies, in the thing, they do the exact same thing, except instead of putting an orange peel in his mouth, he puts this gigantic piece of like watermelon in his mouth or something stupid like that. And then because his mouth is now forced open with this giant piece of fruit and he can't close it, the little kid grabs the tomato poison sprayer and starts running around pumping the thing, and he's like, oh no, don't spray me with that, kind of thing. And it's like it's getting in his mouth and he's like, and he starts choking and dying, and it ends up being a hit. Like the little kid killed his grandfather, but they don't change anything. Like they do almost shot for shot the same thing. It's just like the kid's a little bit more nefarious about it. And now when I watch that scene with Marlon Brando, it's an amazing scene, but I'm like, don't trust that fucking kid. He's got that little poison sprayer. He's going to get you.
Yeah. I mean, there's also, I mean, there's a lot of it like been done so many times, parodies of The Godfather, but
yeah.
But the I've always liked Dom DeLuise and Men in Tights.
Oh my gosh, that little lizard. It's so out of left field. It's like I remember watching that and going like, what? What is that? Like he's like petting it and it's kind of going like.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't understand a word you're saying. Oh, or just cotton balls. I just went to the dentist, and then all of a sudden he talks much clearer. And the funny thing is, that's how he did it. If I'm not mistaken, they said something about like Brando put something in his mouth to get that. type of voice.
Oh.
Anyways, no, it is like that performance, like Brando's performance. That's why De Niro gets a lot of credit for the second one, because it is such a daring performance. How do you
Yeah.
commit to that kind of a voice? It reminds me of like Heath Ledger. I mean, Johnny Depp does this sometimes too. Like when you commit to a voice that's very, very different from your own, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna talk like this for 3 hours.
Yeah.
It could easily just be a complete train wreck. Like it just could not work. And I'm sure we can come up with examples for that. But
Leonardo DiCaprio in Blood Diamond.
I need to see that movie, I guess. Yeah, I haven't seen it.
I mean, that's not an example of terrible. Like he's good in it. It's just it's a little odd.
I mean, it gets a Bane and Dark Knight Rises, and not to mention the Batman voice in the Nolan trilogy. Generally,
actually, not to derail the conversation any more than we did with the parodies and everything, but actually, the funny thing with the DiCaprio thing in Blood Diamond is that most of the criticism about his voice was that most people thought that he was supposed to be doing a South African accent, and he wasn't. He was doing more of a Central African accent, and a lot of accent. A lot of linguists have actually said that he pretty much nailed it. It's just people figure white guy in Africa must be South African and weren't hearing what they were expecting to be hearing, but he was doing an entirely different accent. But anyway,
sometimes being accurate is not good.
Do they ever talk about that in the movie, like where he came from or anything?
I haven't seen it in like 3 years.
Yeah, me neither.
I'll get back to you.
My only thought was that like that's very interesting and makes a lot of sense, and at the same time also like, I almost feel like that would have been nice to know in the movie,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But anyway.
Yeah, it's also something not to beat your audience over the head with in your movie. Like, I'm not from South Africa, everybody.
like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies.
Right.
It's okay that I'm talking like this because our parents came from such and such.
Yeah. No, I definitely see what you're talking about, Gil, in terms of just. And it's not even a thing with accents. It's just a thing with a character voice that is just not your own.
Yeah.
In fact, I mean, the closer it gets to your own voice, I can see it actually getting harder. Like if you're just intentionally doing like a German accent and you're just speaking as yourself, but if I were somebody from Germany and you're just getting the cadence right and everything like that, I could see that being easier than just being like an American who from Iowa playing another American from Iowa, but just taking on a character voice that's like slightly different and having to hold that the whole time. Like that's got to be really difficult.
Do you feel that this might be Brando's best performance?
Well, a lot of people would consider, obviously, On the Waterfront,
Right.
probably is one of his biggest. Also, he is quite good in Streetcar Named Desire.
Yeah.
Still didn't see it.
So, I mean, that one I definitely want to show to Diana as well, just because, yeah. But, and I'm
Stella.
I mean, there's definitely, yeah, like the wife beating husband. So, it's that the acting was one thing for sure, and I don't think I've ever got to make this point actually, but I do give credit to De Niro for owning that voice, because I don't know if that voice could have been just old age, that he lost his voice over the decades, but the fact that I guess he had some speech impediment, right, as a kid or something.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure.
Well, they did kind of set that up in Godfather 2 at the beginning, that when she's pleading with the Don to spare her son, that he's 9 and he
he's
still
not
doesn't speak.
smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, he's got some issues, developmental issues, and maybe that is why he speaks the way that he speaks. And yeah, and De Niro, without having cotton balls in his mouth,
Yeah.
like succeeded really well in selling that for that long period of time in the movie, and this whispery, raspy voice that was, very commanding, even though he wasn't as commanding in his charisma and demeanor as Brando. Still, like he didn't do it harm, let's just say. So that's very tough to pull off. Um,
One thing that I will bring up about Godfather 2 that I think was a standout was the storyline with Fredo. Um, I mean, obviously that's like one of the more iconic scenes
Yeah.
ever. I mean, they also got parodied in South Park, obviously, with the
Yes.
assassination in the lake and everything like that. Only it was only in South Park it was with a wiffle bat, but also John Cazale, the actor. I mean, holy crap! His entire filmography is The Godfather, The Conversation, The Godfather Part 2, Dog Day Afternoon, and The Deer Hunter, and then he died.
Wow.
Like, he only made iconic movies his entire career. I mean, that entire storyline with Fredo in Godfather 2. I mean, honestly, I think that's the biggest payoff in Michael's side of the story in the entire movie that you can jump off of from Godfather 1. Uh, that is kind of the slow burn factor that does get a payoff on Michael's side.
Hmm.
Was that relationship with Fredo, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Go for
No,
it.
it sounds right.
I think like Diana actually missed it when that happened. She like didn't, because it was done off screen when the camera was on Michael, and it's like, what did happen? Did they kill him? It's like, yeah, that's why they called the kid. They took the kid away from the boat so they couldn't do that. But also the whole storyline is a bit weird. It's not very clear what he did. Like he sold him out. Like I guess he exposed him in some sense, and that's why they try to assassinate him and things like that. But it's not very clear, like what exactly happens there. It's a bit vague.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not all up in your face about entirely Fredo's connections with those people. Upon rewatch, and I mean, there are actually threads online like, why did Michael kill Fredo? There are people still talking about this,
Yeah.
and uh, which I mean, honestly, my conclusion was that Michael just decided that Fredo was a liability. It wasn't necessarily what he did. It was that Fredo was just a weak link, and he needed to, get rid of that weak link. They always talk about Fredo. He's not that smart. He's not that. Uh, he's not. He's just not that guy. He's just constantly a liability, and with uh, and you compile that with he's not perfectly trustworthy and he's not perfectly loyal. I think that Michael just came to the conclusion that you just got to cut him loose
Yeah.
for the good of everybody else. It wasn't necessarily what he did. It was just that plus he is what he is.
Yeah, I do wonder if, and I'm sure maybe on those threads they'll come up with like theories, but I wonder if it is some sense him killing Fredo is is indirectly about him killing his father, essentially, because Fredo, um, was much like Vito, like because Vito had the, he was quote unquote dumb, like he didn't speak until he was older, and like when Fredo was born, he's got
Yeah.
some issues. Like he was the kid that had the most issues when he was a baby and stuff,
Hmm.
and uh, and maybe in some sense, much like Vito's mom took care of him in spite of his issues, and maybe other people took him in once he got to America, as opposed to Michael, instead of doing the right thing and trying to welcome Fredo in and care for him and reconnect him with the family and the business in a way that would make him feel like more involved, so he wouldn't. And he actually, that's the thing, he actually came back. That was the whole thing in the later part in the movie, that he kind of, he tries, like he accepts him back, he accepts his sister Talia Shire back, um, but then out of nowhere, he kills him. So it's just like it seems like he was trying to make amends. He was trying to do the right thing, but and that would be what Vito would do. Like you feel like that's what a Godfather would do. He would be compassionate. He would find a way because family is important. And Michael's like, nah, fuck it. He's just like the consummate chess player, and then I feel like the chess pieces are not connecting. Who cares if it's the brother? He's got to go. It's just
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's very, that's, I guess, the tragedy of the movie. That's, I think, when he kills Fredo is really when he is no longer his father's son. I mean, he's his father's son, but he's no longer his father. Like if there was any inkling that he was going to be anything like his father, he's not. He's worse. Like he wanted to be a good person. He wanted to turn the family to be legitimate, but he turned out to be worse. It's like yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was my reading of it. I don't know if
It feels about right.
In order to kill your innocence, you kind of have to kill it yourself, kind of thing. But
yeah, like
and
yeah, it basically, and this is my problem with the second movie, is that he's already lost his innocence in a way in the first
mm,
movie, and here just, and on the second one, Michael loses his innocence again.
Yeah.
That's
well, he
that's pretty
decides to
much.
completely defenestrate it.
Yeah, exactly. And in relation to his father, I guess it's more potent. This point is, without the flashbacks, Godfather Part 2 is a meh movie. Like it's okay. It's got
Yeah.
well-made scenes, but it's the reflection on the father and the type of person that he was,
Yeah.
and his origin and why he was so respected, and you can connect the dots of why. And Michael is just not that. Michael is whip smart, and he really knows how to make the right move to survive. And he gets lucky a few times, but he is not a warm person. He is not a family man. You don't see him playing much with his kids. He is just not. It's very sad. But maybe, I guess, that's the movie. It's supposed to be like a full-on tragedy. So.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk really briefly about one of the things in this story that I really love and really find fascinating. And you see it in many, many stories because it's something you see in real life too. But I just think you see it a lot in stories. But the concept of like very powerful people, powerful families, powerful people who end up um, taking on like the Robert Duvall character is what I want to talk about. But when you have the concept of like a very powerful person or powerful family taking on an outsider like a child and pretty much raising them, or even just a young person and raising them, and how the it's the person who's not actually the blood child, who goes on to really excel and really perform because they're constantly trying to prove themselves, kind of thing. And then they almost kind of, in a lot of ways, outshine the natural children who almost had it easy or something. You know, you got like The Godfather obviously shows this with Robert Duvall's character, and then there's a little bit of it in Dune, but also like uh, Harrison Ford's kid in Cowboys and Aliens, and well, his kid being the weak one, and then the little Mexican guy being or Indian guy, whatever. I can't even remember. I barely remember the character. Just remember somebody was his like adopted son was like way better. And then like Game of Thrones, obviously is a good example of that too. But it's like a similar concept across many different stories.
Yeah.
I don't know how often something like that actually happens in real life, but it seems like something that easily could make a lot of sense.
As far as like the son being,
So like you've got like a powerful person who, you know, takes on a like an adoptive kid. You know,
oh,
in all these in all the examples I used were like a son, right? But an adoptive son, and then that son, you know, works very hard to make something of himself because of their circumstances, and then ends up outshining the natural born children. You know, like the way Robert Duvall is like so useful and so put together and so trustworthy and so dependable compared to James Caan.
Yeah,
yeah. I
And
see.
Fredo, definitely Fredo. And his sister too. You know, like aside from Michael, they're kind of a train wreck. You know what I mean?
well,
James Caan is he gets things done, but he's not particularly good at running the family, you know? Whereas the sister is just a train wreck and Fredo is a mess, you know. and and then, you know, say it's very similar to like, you know, Game of Thrones. You've got like 5 children, and that, you know, huge spoilers for Game of Thrones, obviously. The adoptive son is the one who like really excels, you know.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's got to be. I mean, I don't want to say low hanging fruit, but it's kind of low hanging fruit in a way. Yeah, just to kind of explore that kind of relationship where you've got a character with the same like patriarch or
Yeah.
possibly matriarch, but
Yeah.
usually patriarch. But one who just grew up expecting everything to be handed to him,
Yeah.
as opposed to somebody who grew up knowing shit, this all isn't going to be mine.
Yeah.
And how they would behave. I mean, that's it. I mean, I'm not dissing any of these dramas for exploring that. I mean, I think that's
I
great
just find it
stuff.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's great stuff to explore. Like, just there are a lot of people. I mean, it's a real life reality that
Yeah.
okay, yeah, there. If you grow up uh, what is it with Cartman when he in the Poor and Stupid episode? I wasn't born with a plastic fork in my
Oh, damn.
mouth. Yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely an interesting thing to explore, and I think it was done pretty well.
Almost a
Uh,
little bit.
it,
This is a little different, but almost kind of like Gladiator too, in a way, because they
yeah,
kind of sort of say that Russell Crowe is almost like a son to the Emperor, and
yeah,
then Commodus, Joaquin Phoenix, you know, is like
yeah,
just grown up as a prince, basically, had everything handed to him.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, definitely a plus for The Godfather is that was actually fairly well explored while not making it a focal point of the movie.
Right? Yeah, yeah,
Like I mean, when you I mean, I actually think that that's one of the strengths of The Godfather that really needs to be brought up is the fact that there are those stories in the movie that lesser filmmakers would just be like, that's an entire movie. Like,
yeah,
you could spend 90 minutes talking about the adopted son of a mob boss and make that a compelling film. But The Godfather managed to work that in as just kind of like, well, no, that's just this person that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And this is how he would react while these things are happening. But yeah, I think that's one of the strengths. Definitely.
It makes sense for the adoptive son to be try to be an overachiever to
Real
make up for.
go-getter.
Yeah, which is in life actually might not always be the same. It depends.
Oh, yeah, I think there's a lot of factors probably.
Yeah, it sometimes is the reverse. Like sometimes what happens is wealthy families would adopt, say, like a child that was coming from a underprivileged background or had a lot of trauma when they're kids, and expecting that with the right resources you can really help them, but it's often not that easy. Like they'll probably do well given the circumstances, but you can't expect to have the exact same results that you had with your kids that started from like scratch with like a very well balanced childhood and everything. It's and very few obstacles, and so it's sometimes the reverse.
This is a bad example, but for some reason it's what's jumping into my mind right now, and but kind of like it's a bad example because they're both adopted, but kind of like the two adopted brothers in that Lion movie, and Nicole Kidman.
Patel.
Yeah, Dev Patel. Yeah, because it's like even though he was adopted too, it's like what Gil's talking about is the same sort of situation. It's like they should have had, if it was 100% nurture, then technically both of them had the same basic upbringing because they were both adopted at a very young age by the same couple and given the same opportunities. But you can't tell, sometimes somebody's going to turn out drastically different, and his adopted brother in that movie is like he can't even be around his parents. He can't even stand to be in the same room as them. And his whole life is a mess, and everything and whatever. But
yeah, like that genetics play a big part of it, even though I'm sure that the nurture part, he's maybe better off than he would be in rural India. But,
sure. Well, I mean, like we said, there's thousands of factors. There's no way to tell for sure what's going to happen.
But genetics definitely play a big role in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no,
I
it's
just
interesting.
think the like you said, I guess the best way to put it is that just because it's a trope that we see in movies, this whole concept of what we were just talking about, it doesn't mean that it's that it's always going to work out that way. But it's a story that as an audience can watch and clearly see how things played out. They like Matt said, they don't have to devote a bunch of time to it. We have the scene where Michael is talking to the girl that he brought to the wedding. That's his wife actually, right? Yeah, this is his future wife.
Kate,
yeah, Kate. Thank you. And he's explaining who everybody is at the wedding to her, and how who Robert Duvall is. He just says, "Oh, this is him. He's basically like a brother to me," and blah 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 blah. And then that's all we need. We can see from the rest of the movie how everything turned out because it's a logical, progression. We can definitely see how that could happen. It makes sense.
and it's definitely an ensemble movie for
Yeah.
sure. And I think our discussion about the whole genetics nurture versus nature versus nurture is it loops around to Michael, because Michael's journey is very much about his DNA and how as opposed to the adoptive son, he does the reverse. He wants to rebel. And the funny thing is that his dad wanted him to rebel, just not in that way. Like he wanted him to be a legit, like to become a politician or something, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to do his own thing and carve his own destiny, and for him it was joining the army. So oftentimes the kids that are pampered the most tend to also want to rebel and do their own thing, but eventually in an indirect way it loops back and they end up being in the exact same place where their dads were. So which is the whole journey of the movie. It's interesting. I always felt the same way about like my dad, that basically, no matter how different I think I might be from him, I mean, I basically ended up being really into movies because he was very into movies and he worked in a movie theater in like the late 60s and early 70s. And we had a big VHS collection, so it's kind of like how I discovered movies. Um, and but then at the same time, my day job is kind of like I do sales, and my dad has a shoe store where he sells shoes, so he's technically also in sales. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, how did I end up here? Like, I really didn't intend this to happen, but I guess it all, like, at some point when I was younger, I wanted to be a basketball player, and then I should have realized, like my dad, looking at my dad, that I'm not gonna be very tall, so I should give that up very soon. But then, like, I looped around in a way, and I came back to the same place where, like, a very similar place to him. So go figure. Like, the life kind of leads you in ways that you don't expect.
Yeah.
You know, and that's
Is
The
this-
Godfather.
Is it? Go ahead, Jason.
The only other thing I wanted to say was that the to bring up one more funny thing, the really excellent scene in the Family Guy episode where they're all, I think it's like they're in a panic room filling up with water or something.
Yeah. And it's filling with water, and they're all about to die. And Peter says he didn't care for the Godfather.
That's the legacy of this movie, is that it's so
Right.
great that, you know, he in his dying moments with his family, he feels he has to get something off his chest, and he says, "I didn't like the Godfather." And my favorite thing in that scene is how every single one of them in the family turn on him and just go, well, Meg's not in the room, but the rest of them all turn on him and just go like, "What is wrong with you?" And they all, it's so great. They must have recorded all this stuff and just kind of mashed it all together, because they're all talking over each other and they're just being like, you are you crazy? Well, I mean, it's so good. And they all start like listing things that are so great about it. And it's so awesome how, out of all of this stuff between Brian and Lois, obviously voicing the most opposition and bringing up the most points, and somebody's like, "Oh, it's a great cast," and so, and then you just hear Seth Green doing, his, Chris in his weird little gravelly voice, and he's like, "Robert Duvall."
Great actors. Did not care for the movie. I like that scene with the armchairs where they're all like, I don't even know what they're speaking Italian. They're speaking a language of subtlety, which is something that you wouldn't understand.
I think he ends by saying something like, "I enjoyed the money pit."
Yes.
It's a stupid remark to that, that conversation. But
it is interesting, like, because when you think about this movie and its place, I mean, you can mention Citizen Kane is also not a movie that a lot of people would like, but the casual movie watcher, or kids that are starting out to watch movies. Yeah, The Godfather wouldn't necessarily be an extremely appealing movie. It's more so kind of like what you said about moments and scenes. You appreciate them. This happened to me with Full Metal Jacket when I was younger and I watched it, and I felt like, wow, I don't know what's going on, but this is really intense and it's very engaging. So I feel like The Godfather definitely has that in spades. And we technically didn't even like cover the whole thing in the end, like which that definitely, it's tough to appreciate when you're younger, but the baptism with the Michael, that the baby's called Michael, but because he's doing the baptism, he has to speak for the baby, but his name is Michael, so he's and he has to like be the pure soul ushering him into Christianity, but it's actually him ushering himself into becoming the Antichrist, essentially.
And also on the outer layer of the onion, he is literally becoming a godfather.
Yeah, he's becoming a godfather in the scene, and he's becoming a godfather, like, spiritually to others. And and he's renouncing Satan exactly when he's doing Satan's bidding of killing a bunch of people.
The priest does say that. Do you renounce blah 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 blah?
It is. one of the greatest sequences in cinema history, and again, why I will never go through a revolving door again and not freak out.
I like
No,
revolving doors.
but yeah, it's yeah, that sequence is just phenomenal. Can I go
So
on my Gordon Willis round or Gordon
yeah,
Willis
Yeah,
rant?
we should end with that for sure. Yeah, unless there's something else.
no,
Okay,
no.
okay, so it's not controversial to say that Gordon Willis is one of the greatest cinematographers who's ever lived. During the early 70s, yeah, The Godfather came out in what, 72, right? Okay, so basically, the iconic cinematographers, if you have to pick three who were working during that time, it was Gordon Willis, Conrad L. Hall, and Vittorio Storaro. Vittorio's the only one who's still alive. Uh, I still think that Conrad L. Hall is the greatest cinematographer who's ever lived. That said, upon revisiting these movies, these two Godfather films, and looking at what Gordon Willis was doing at that time, I do think that Gordon Willis was the greatest cinematographer working at that time in film history.
Hmm.
And I'm going to say that for a few reasons. I mean, and I'm going to actually allude to something that Conrad L. Hall said directly about Gordon Willis. Conrad L. Hall actually flat out said that he wouldn't have the balls to do what Gordon Willis was doing. Uh, Actually, Hall's words. He said he wouldn't have the balls. I'm not putting words in his mouth, nor balls in. Yeah, I, I, I mean, Gordon Willis was known as the Prince of Darkness. Gordon Willis always kind of hated that term. He just kind of said, like, no, it's not dark, it's proper exposure. The rest of you are just overexposing your fucking film. Uh, but I mean, like the opening shot in Godfather 1, I mean, that's a dark shot, but you see the glint in the guy's eyes. I mean, that was like the trademark thing of The Godfather. That's I mean, to this day, people notice that The Godfather was top lit. That the eyes are usually in shadow, but again, this was a deliberate decision. And Gordon Willis almost got fired several times because the dailies kept coming back like, we can't see their eyes. Yeah, it's deliberate, but you can see the glint in them. He was so attentive to detail that even when you're seeing people who are hiding shit and you're trying to convey that visually, that you're top lighting them and you can't see their eyes, you're at least seeing the glint, you're at least seeing the humanity inside of them. But beyond that, you look at Apocalypse Now, which Vittorio Storaro shot, which Francis Ford Coppola also obviously directed. I mean, gorgeously filmed movie. I'm not dissing Vittorio Storaro, but you really can't. I mean, the thing is, Storaro's philosophy and techniques that he used on those films, he kind of took to a hyper level, and they don't translate very well nowadays. His color theory and everything like that. He experimented. He was the first guy to bust through the door. He got bloody in a lot of ways. He changed cinema in a lot of positive ways, and I will always admire him for his contributions. But uh, you know, uh, his work in the 70s, it still looks like 70s to me in a lot of ways. Gordon Willis's technique in the 70s, uh, barring obviously the technological limitations that they had in the 70s, I think you take it to today, and he's still one of the best cinematographers on the market. One of the most daring, one of the most evocative, one of the most interesting. Uh, I mean, you watch The Godfather now, and at least I watch The Godfather now, and I'm still thinking this guy just gets what's going on every level of what's happening in front of the camera. He just understands it, and he's representing it as well as anybody ever could have. There is nobody that I could swap out for Gordon Willis and get better, more appropriate images than what Gordon Willis produced.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm one thing I was gonna say is it seems like that there's some attempt at like imitating it. Like recently we discussed the Batman
Yeah,
and how overly dark it was, like not as good as The Godfather.
right.
But you know, it still looked very, very good. But it's just maybe that twinkle in the eyes was missing sometimes, or at least like The Godfather plays with the roller coaster ride with the lighting too, because when you're outside it's bright, when you're inside you're in the
Yeah,
shadows. You know, like it's got that roller coaster ride, whereas some, and I guess like I haven't seen Game of Thrones, but I know Game of Thrones has this reputation for several episodes that are overly dark, but not in a
yeah,
good way. They're just all just very shadowy. There's like
yeah,
no
yeah.
key light.
They're just underexposed.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's supposed to be some sort of tonal thing, but it's just like not working well. So yeah, like doing what he did was very daring, and the fact that he pulled it off, like that's the thing. Everybody was swinging for the fences here, like and hit, like like Brando, Gordon Willis, Coppola, like they just did some really daring stuff, and and it just hit. And when you have that many hits in one movie, then it is basically captivating. It's just even if it's not your kind of movie, you can't help but appreciate it. But I do wonder, some people will watch The Godfather and will think it's a bit too dark nowadays, you know, modern, especially like Marvel fans.
Yeah,
They're used to their stuff, all their content being very brightly. But
yeah. I mean, I mean, Gordon Willis did subsequently talk about a couple of shots in the movies, in particularly in Godfather 2, where he thought that he might have gone a little bit too far in making it dark. Like maybe there should have been a little bit more of an edge light on on an actor, and since that wasn't there, he just kind of seeped into the background or something. But particularly in Godfather 1, I mean, I don't know. I'm looking at that movie and just thinking, uh, it's not dark in that I'm looking at the shadows and thinking I want to see what's in there. It's dark in that, um, fuck, we're in a really dark moment right now, aren't we? you know,
hmm.
I'm still studying the screen. I mean, that's the thing, like I think that there's a little bit of an idea that in order to get an audience to want to study what's on the screen in front of them in the in the somewhat widescreen aspect ratio. I mean, obviously this wasn't shot anamorphic. That well, it has to be lit. Like no, you're still studying the screen. The way that Gordon Willis and Francis Ford Coppola and the production designers and all these people actually put these scenes together, you're still studying these things. You're still studying the image. meticulously. In fact, you might be studying it more meticulously because there's not a whole lot of shit to look at. You know, you're seeing the glint in the eye, but you're not seeing the eye. You're seeing the shape of the face, but you're not seeing the face. And when you take all that information away, when you take so much of that information away, there's actually a lot more to study more meticulously as a viewer than if it were traditionally lit the way that the studios wanted it to be traditionally lit, the way that was being pushed for, and what almost got Gordon Willis fired several times. But
There was a funny story with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas with the cinematographer there. His name is Nicola Piccorini. He's done a bunch of movies with Terry Gilliam, and the that movie is very dark. I love that
oh,
movie. It's one of
he's
my
blind in
favorites.
one eye too.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, but like I think it was, the dailies came back and Terry Gilliam is like telling him, Nicola, isn't like the footage a bit dark? And he was like, yeah, isn't it great? So he basically, you just really, whatever you do, you want to commit to it. You really want to commit, like, yeah, that's what we're going for. Like, it was supposed to be very dark. And I think that movie looks great. But yeah, like anything else with creative stuff, it's all about, does it suit the story? And yeah, it really suits the story in The Godfather. He really nailed it there. And maybe in other circumstances it would be too much. So it's he really struck a very good balance. It was definitely ahead of its time as far as like the sophistication, I
Yeah,
think, of the lighting and everything. Um, well, after that, like yeah, in the 80s and 90s, like it was very easy to do top, you know, top lighting that's somewhat soft but still very like contrasty. It's like it got easier, as the
yeah,
decades were on. But
yeah,
but he did it a lot with Woody
yeah.
Allen movies
Uh,
too, I think.
yeah, well, and yeah, it became easier because Gordon Willis was the first person to
Yeah, to,
bust
to,
through
to do
that
it a lot.
door, and do it successfully. But again, he did go on to do movies like Annie Hall, and I mean, to my understanding, I mean, obviously, all these movies came out before I was born, but there was kind of a ripple in Hollywood, like, what? Wait a minute, you're hiring the Prince of Darkness to shoot a comedy. And I think Gordon Willis did a brilliant job with Annie Hall. I think he did a brilliant job with Manhattan, even though Woody Allen still hates that movie for some reason. Uh, I, he was just always somebody who knew how to adjust, and uh, and knew how to push the envelope when he needed to push it. He was never afraid. I mean, okay, that's actually a stretch. I'm sure that he was afraid all the time.
Oh no, I mean, not afraid, but just you know
no,
risk avert. Yeah, maybe like people, you have to think about it. Does it fit this? But
right,
Annie Hall and Manhattan are very dramatic looking comedies. I mean, I
yeah,
think that's what Woody Allen was going for. Sometimes people make those choices when they make a comedy.
yeah. No, I mean, yeah, he was bold. I mean, yeah, I actually think it would be diminishing his legacy to say that he was never afraid, because as Worf told Alexander once, the person who knows no fear is a coward. You know, uh, no, he was probably afraid all the time, but he pushed through. He was always somebody who was willing to uh try things, and he was confident that he knew something that a lot of higher ups didn't know, that like, I mean, he was confident enough to look at his light meter and see, okay, yeah, that's just going to go black, we're not going to go back.
once you go black. Um,